Hey, deserving listeners. Today's episode is about the psychology of Marlon Brando. Up until recently, I didn't really think much about Marlon Brando. I didn't know much about him. I remembered him from The Godfather and Apocalypse Now and Superman as Superman's father. And I remember hearing that he was really difficult to work with. And I remember hearing that he was sort of insane and sort of crazy. But I had no idea how fascinating his life was. And I had no idea how fascinating his psychology was. Well, that's what I want to talk about today. I want to see if we can understand Brando and why he was the way that he was. And to help me talk about that, I asked Carey Burbank to join me on this episode. I was listening to the TBTL podcast, the Too Beautiful to Live podcast, and I heard that Carey Burbank was really into Marlon Brando. So I messaged you on Facebook, and I asked Carey to come on the podcast so she could offer her insights into his life and his personality. Welcome to the podcast, Carey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything you want to introduce about yourself before we get going?
Other than I have no official legitimate credentials to warrant being on this show, it's not going to stop me from giving my very passionate opinions about Marlon Brando.
So today we're going to talk about his work as an actor. We're going to talk about his childhood, and I'll propose here and there a tentative analysis of his personality and why he was the way that he was, because he had some interesting behaviors in his life. So first, let's talk about Marlon Brando as an actor, because for those of you that don't know his influence on American society and film, I think you really should know, because I didn't know this until I did a deep dive on him. Carey.
Yes.
Let me ask you a specific question. Do you think, many people think he's one of the best actors that ever lived. Do you think he's one of the best actors that ever lived?
I do.
Why do you think that?
Well, I will say I wasn't actually very aware of Marlon Brando myself up until about 3 years ago. I was home alone. My husband was traveling, and I was in the mood to watch a movie. So I went on demand, and nothing really appealed to me. So I went to, I think, the classic movie collections or something, and happened to see Streetcar Named Desire and thought, well, I've never seen this movie. I've heard it talked about a lot. I should just check it out. And I was absolutely blown away. Like, I was mesmerized by this in black and white and, terrible lighting and all this stuff. It was just the most captivating performance I've ever seen in my life. And so then I became very curious about who this guy was. And the more I found out about him, the more fascinating, the more intriguing he became, not just as an actor, but who he is as a human being, which of course translates into his acting.
Right.
But in my opinion, I've never seen anyone that's grabbed my attention and he could read a grocery list and I would just be sitting there dumbfounded and, captivated.
Yeah. What was it about his performance? Is he mesmerizing? What did you like about him? Because I recently did a deep dive and watched a lot of these movies myself and have a few things to say too. But what was it about his performance that really got you?
Well, I'm going to state the obvious here and say first, he's quite easy on the eyes. Mm-hmm. So there was I wasn't aware of how good looking of a guy he was when he was younger. And I don't even know if I can fully articulate what it is other than to say, perhaps it's just because he is so authentic, and I don't think there's a single, bat of his eye that's not being utterly authentic to the character that he's playing. And it's so, I once heard someone say, the more authentic you are, the more captivating you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more captivating you are. And I feel like he does that to a degree that most actors aren't even capable of reaching.
Yeah, I agree. Mesmerizing, easy on the eyes, authentic. I mean, he was such a fox when he was young.
He really was.
Because I remember him from The Godfather and
right.
from an older guy, and he wasn't bad looking. But man, when he was in his 20s, in Streetcar was maybe when he was 30-ish or late 20s or something.
I think he was in his early 20s then, yeah. And boy, you're not kidding. I've even watched, there's an audition tape of him auditioning for Rebel Without a Cause, which he did not get that part, but There's maybe a 3-4 minute audition tape that you can Google online and watch. And even just that, like him standing there, slating for the camera, turning his head to the right, turning his head to the left, spinning all the way around, you can kind of see in his eyes, he finds this whole thing a little bit ridiculous, but he's very young and this is his first audition of this nature. So he's going along with it, but just the story that's happening in his eyes and his little smirk as he looks at the camera, like I could just watch that over and over again. And he's not even doing anything, you know?
Yeah. People say, I didn't realize this, but James Dean and Elvis, who are two of the biggest sex icons, you know, just these foundational men in American pop culture,
sure,
modeled themselves after Marlon Brando.
They did. James Dean very much so. Like,
right.
Almost studied him as a person, not only as an actor, but kind of started mimicking the way he dressed and sort of different mannerisms of his.
Right, which is just so interesting because to me, Marlon Brando is this crazy kook who was in The Godfather. I had no idea that he was like the original Elvis.
Yeah.
You know? And we'll get into even more how intertwined these people's lives were. One thing I just want to get out of the way, because a lot of people refer to him as like the mumbler. You know, he's like, well, yeah, I was asking around as I was preparing for this episode. I was like, what do you think about Marlon Brando? And like, well, isn't he the one who mumbled a lot? What do you think about that? Does this mumbling get to you?
No, I mean, he definitely, I think that reputation is pretty legitimate because he even makes jokes about the fact that he mumbles, or used to. So I think that I understand where that comes from. But in terms of watching his performances in the films that I've seen and even interviews that I've watched, I don't think I would have noticed it if he hadn't been labeled with the mumbler or kind of notorious for being this actor that mumbles. I almost think it's kind of a suggestive thing where you hear that and then you pick up on it, in my opinion.
Right.
Because I just think he has a unique way of speaking, but I wouldn't really describe it as mumbling.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are times briefly where he's mumbling, but I think it's more of a product of what acting was when he came up.
Exactly.
You were supposed to dictate, and you were a thespian, and you spoke in a certain way that was understandable to people in the back row without any amplification. Whereas he's in that zone where he's intimate and authentic, and he talks like real people talk, and it doesn't always come out very dictatorial, you know, if that's a word, probably not. But, you know, like in Julius Caesar, he doesn't mumble at all.
No.
He's very Shakespearean. So I agree. I think that it's a reputation that he got, and then
I think you hit the nail
really,
100. You hit it on the head, because I think it was in the timing that he was sort of being discovered, acting was this whole other thing. And so when he came in and was understated and soft-spoken and could also tap into his sort of feminine side while also being this sometimes edgy, dangerous character, I think people didn't really know what to think about that because it was so different.
Right.
And it just, instead of getting labeled maybe understated, it was more this guy, he mumbles, you know?
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing that upon reading people review him back then was that he was in touch with his feminine side, which today I wouldn't see that looking back at these performances, but given the tradition of men in movies up until that point,
sure,
it was, you know, it had feminine qualities to it. Okay. So more about his career. He was cited by many actors as a major influence, including, as we said, James Dean, Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was a terrible actor, so I don't know why, you know, I don't know how he was following in Marlon Brando's footsteps, but Dustin Hoffman, Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Johnny Depp, even Ryan Gosling, and many, many more. I saw interviews with these guys saying they all look back to Marlon Brando as the actor to emulate. He also gave acting lessons to some famous people. Do you know who? Just a little bit of trivia here.
I do not know.
Michael Jackson. They actually became friends.
I knew they were good friends. I didn't know he gave him acting lessons.
Yeah. Sean Penn, John Voight, and Whoopi Goldberg.
Interesting
of all people,
bunch, yeah.
He won a bunch of awards throughout his life. He was nominated for the Oscars. You know how many times?
I know he won twice, but I don't know how many times he was nominated.
Good. He won twice. He was nominated 8 times. He won for On the Waterfront in 54 and The Godfather in 72. Do you know The Godfather Oscar story?
Yes.
What do you remember about that story?
Well, when he won the Oscar for The Godfather, we may be skipping ahead a little bit here to touch on this, but he's notoriously not interested in the business of show business and things like award ceremonies. And so he wasn't particularly interested in going there to accept this award, but he was very active in a lot of political issues and specifically Native American rights. And he felt like if he had 5 minutes to be able to speak to 85,000 people at once, he wanted to take advantage of that for something that he felt was more important. Yeah. So he sent a Native American girl, Sasheen Littlefeather, up to read this speech that he had prepared about the particular issues at the time, and they wouldn't let her read it. So she was just able to kind of, I don't know, I think they gave her like 30 seconds to just say, I cannot, accept this award. On behalf of Marlon Brando, he would like to decline this generous award. And then she said, because of the treatment of Native Americans in Hollywood and in film right now, which kind of was met with mixed responses of some applause and some booing, and it was a very awkward moment. And I think at the time, the Academy and some of the people in that room did not really appreciate that.
Yeah. From my impression, there was a huge backlash in the media and from the American public, although there were some people who were sympathetic to it and maybe even applauded it. From what I can tell, because I think Marlon Brando eventually was forced to sort of apologize to the American people, which is interesting because today every other speech is a political speech.
Of course.
And speaking up for the oppressed. And it's just a sign of the times that in 1973 that people would boo a Native American woman saying that he's going to decline this because of the treatment of our people.
Yeah.
Today she would get a standing ovation.
Yeah, she'd be one in a crowd of many people giving a similar speech. You know, I think this is. Perhaps we'll get to this more in depth later, but I think this is one example of how he was so far ahead of his time in so many ways. And I've watched these old interviews with him on the Dick Cavett show, I think in 1973. They're really, to me, very interesting, and they're on YouTube. And he's talking, of course, about some Native American rights on that as well, but just a lot of the way he thinks, a lot of the way he approached life and himself and trying to understand what we're here for and looking out for the more vulnerable people in society, whomever that may be, in so many ways, I think he was very far ahead of his time and his thinking was so progressive at the time. But I was recently watching some of these things and thinking these apply 100% to exactly what's going on in a lot of cases right now.
Totally. Yeah. And I have some ideas as to what about his childhood would lead him to have a personality trait that questions the authority and the society in which he lived in. Other awards that he got, he had some Golden Raspberry Award nominations. Those are the anti-Oscars.
Right.
He won once for The Island of Dr. Moreau in 1996. Have you seen this movie?
I have not. I think because I have such a good impression of Marlon Brando and because I have such a soft spot for him, I almost don't want to watch this film.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I'll have to at some point.
It's notoriously bad whenever you want to talk about like a bad movie or like a disastrous production of a movie, people point toward The Island of Dr. Monroe. I want to say Monroe, but it's Moreau. He got the Worst Supporting Actor award that time. He got an Emmy, which I didn't know, which I wouldn't even think he was on TV, but he was on TV in 1979 for I think it's a sequel to Roots called Roots, The Next Generations. And he plays a white supremacist. So he politically wanted to be involved in a lot of projects that helped people understand racism and oppression. But since he's white, he would often get these roles as like the ignorant white man. Like in Sayonara or Sayonara. Have you seen that movie where he's in Japan? He plays a racist white American GI who I think eventually falls in love with I didn't watch the whole thing, but falls in love with a Japanese woman. But at first is very bigoted against that. And incidentally, have you seen South Pacific, the musical? There's a similar storyline in that. And I realized that South Pacific the movie came out after Sayonara. And I was in South Pacific in high school.
Oh, really?
And as a Japanese American myself, I played a white GI who falls in love with an Asian woman, and the Asian woman was played by a white girl. And I had to sing this song about racism and about, falling in love with people of color and how you've got to be carefully taught, to not like those people. But anyway.
How did it go over?
I'm a terrible actor, but I like to sing. So that's why I got the part. In fact, I think every guy who tried out for a part in South Pacific got a part. You know what I mean?
One of those, yeah.
It's because they're so limited in terms of so I automatically got a part. IMDb, he is on one list of the top 100 greatest actors of all time. He's number 2. Who do you think's number 1?
Laurence Olivier?
Nope. Good guess, though.
Oh.
Jack Nicholson.
He's number 1?
Number 1.
Are you kidding? Wow.
I mean, there's a number of lists on IMDb, but he's number 1. In 1961, he got the Golden Apple Award for the least cooperative actor. In 1999, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most important people of the century. And upon reading this, I was like, why have I not known more about Marlon Brando? I mean, what's wrong with me? Okay. So let's get into his life here. Born in 1924, Omaha, Nebraska. My white side of my family is from Nebraska, so I feel sort of akin. And he kind of reminds me of my grandfather, actually.
My grandfather's from Nebraska, right near Omaha, this little town called Broken Bow.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. Most of my family's from Kansas, which is, just south of Nebraska. Have you driven through Nebraska?
No, and I want to. I really want to.
It is one of the most boring states to drive through. I mean, it's just kind of like these slight rolly hills.
Yeah.
And then you'll see a tree, and then more slightly rolly hills, you'll see another tree. I mean, beautiful, but just interesting, I guess. Anyway, his ancestry is German, Dutch, English, Irish, so kind of typical mishmash of Western European American. He was raised as a Christian Scientist. Did you know any details about his Christian Scientist?
It's not really discussed a whole lot in anything I have read or watched. But
it seems like, in name, they were Christian Scientists.
I think that's more the case.
Yeah.
He was raised more as son of 2 alcoholics. I think that was the bigger religion in the house.
Yeah. The religion of Jack Daniels.
Yes.
He had 2 older sisters. So what do you know about his childhood? I'll fill in whatever else you don't get to, but from what you've said so far, my guess is you know everything. So what do you know about his childhood?
What I know about his childhood is yes, both of his parents were pretty heavy alcoholics. His father was a traveling salesman who spent a lot of time also cheating on his mother. And he was kind of an abusive alcoholic. He would abuse his mom when he would get upset with her. And she was an alcoholic, but Marlon really loved his mom a lot. And she actually was an actor in the local theater, but he would often, as a young kid, have to go to the bars and find her and drag her home. And he would do this thing to keep her alert where he would imitate the barnyard animals, or he would imitate neighbors or friends of theirs to make her laugh and to keep her attention and to keep her awake. And I guess it's sort of rumored that that's where his very first acting kind of began. Mm-hmm. And his father was very withholding. He never really gave Marlon any approval, never made him feel loved. In fact, the opposite, he kind of made him feel worthless and unwanted, and he would never amount to anything. And so he had a lot of issues with regard to his father. But he did, up until about age 7, I believe, they had a governess in their house who cared for the kids, and he got very attached to her. He was very, very attached to her. And she left one day saying she was taking a vacation, but she never came back. And that was like, for him, he's talked about that was like the biggest betrayal of his life, and kind of what created the foundation to not really trust people and having trusting relationships and kind of going through life feeling very unsafe and unloved, unprotected.
Right. Yeah. Good. You truly know everything about this man's life. Yeah. Carey, you described his childhood very well. The only thing I would add that I read was, I don't know if you mentioned this, was his father and mother to some extent were both promiscuous and cheated quite a bit. And the mother was seemingly suicidal.
Yes.
And possibly depressed. So yeah. I want to talk a little bit more in detail about his, what you're calling governess or nanny. Her name was Ermi, apparently. Mm-hmm. And yeah, as you said, he was very attached to her. And from the age of 2 to 7, this woman took care of him. And she was half white, half Asian, like myself. And they were, again, very close. And reportedly, they slept in bed together at night, every night, naked.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what to make of. On one level, it's like, well, if you're 2 and it's hot in Nebraska and you're sleeping in bed, you sleep naked, no big deal. I mean, if Marlon was a little girl, you probably wouldn't think much of it. But it's like, why do we have to sexualize everything? I mean, in the olden days, we didn't even have clothes, so
yeah,
it's like, what's the big deal? But then you think 7 years old and da da da. So it's unclear because Marlon, to my knowledge, never commented on his feelings about that.
No,
maybe he didn't even remember it. I don't know.
The only thing I've heard him say about that was just describing it very fondly, but almost more like, motherly, not anything strange about it. Just, I mean, he was 7,
yeah.
the oldest, and maybe it was really hot. I don't know, but I think it was more of that skin to skin contact probably really stuck out in his mind of
Absolutely.
The nurturing.
Yeah. Now, at the very least, we can say that it provided with him a sensual experience.
Yes.
That was related
Intimate,
to intimate,
yeah.
but also physical, warmth with someone that was not his mother, that was with a person of color, mm-hmm. which influenced likely his mate choices moving forward in life. But yeah, you described it when he was 7. She told him that she was going away, but she would be back soon. And he waited and waited and waited and waited. And then he realized suddenly that she was never coming back. And he wrote about this and talked about it and said that it was a big betrayal to him. And he said, quote, "From that day forward, I became estranged from the world." So, this relationship with Ermi was likely his only secure attachment. He had 2 alcoholic parents who were either distant or abandoning of him emotionally or abusive. And then there's this woman who is taking care of him all the time, and he has a really strong attachment with her. But she just disappears and lies to him and betrays him. And this is a huge attachment injury, which he's already been attachment injured by his parents, mm-hmm. just not being there for him. And so he just has this huge crushing blow to how he feels about himself, how he feels about other people, his trust, and all that kind of stuff. Carey, do you have kids, Carey? Do you want to talk about that?
Luke has a daughter, so I have a stepdaughter, but she's 23.
Oh, okay. Are you going to have kids?
We're trying.
Would you have a nanny, do you think, if you had some kids or one kid?
Well, it's a tough question. I can see the value, not a full-time nanny, but somebody that maybe comes and helps out, just so you can maintain some sense of self or identity. But I think we're fortunate enough that my mom is going to be retired very soon, I think this year, and she's just dying to have some grandkids. So I think it would probably be more of a thing where maybe she could help out a little bit.
Yeah.
But
it's a really common thing today to have nannies. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I don't want to nanny shame anybody, but it's something that I feel like people don't think about in terms of the reality of child development and attachment, because a lot of nanny jobs are temporary. And a lot of nannies will just disappear. They'll just be like, they'll tell little Johnny, okay, so today's my last day and I'm really sad. And the nanny might be legitimately sad, but the nanny's like, I'm moving on in life.
Right.
I'm a young woman. I'm going to college, or I'm moving back, to my home country or whatever. And the child is left there. The child doesn't know. The child is like, you're another mommy to me. But everyone else in society knows, no, that's a temporary nanny. But the kid doesn't know that. And especially when you have a kid who's being neglected and abused by their biological parents, they become even more dependent on that person. And then you add the fact that Marlon Brando had a nanny for 5 years, the same person, and you sleep with her all night.
During the most formative years.
Right. And she didn't even say goodbye. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, we can write, or blah, blah, blah. She just lied to him and just ditched him. I mean, imagine that feeling of like, she didn't even care enough to say goodbye, that she just dropped me like I was, dead weight, and how horrible that would make you feel deep down.
Oh, yeah.
The way I like to describe this to people is like, think of the worst, most terrible breakup you've ever been through, where you might have even kind of stalked them a little bit, and you were just broken up about that. Times a million, that's what this is like. Because as an adult, we have our faculties, we have foundational attachments we can turn to, we have our sense of self. When you're 7, you don't have those things, and especially having been abused. And just thinking about what that did to his psychology and to his neurons, literally, is just very interesting to think about as we move forward into his life as an explanation of why he did some of the things that he did. So as a child, he was defiant. Apparently, he locked teachers into rooms. He set fires. He broke school property. He was expelled. Apparently, he was starved for love and affection. Apparently, so what can we say about his psychology as a result of his early childhood life? What are some sort of summary things we can say about what his brain is like at the age of 10?
He describes the book that he wrote, and I think, and even in the documentary, Listen to Me, Marlon, which is excellent. I recommend it for anybody who might be interested, but as incredibly insecure, like going through life just feeling bad about himself and embarrassed. And he didn't complete, I know you said age 10, but like he didn't end up completing school, so he felt insecure that he was dumb and that he, just wasn't like everybody else. And adding on to that, the trust issues and the anger he felt towards his father, which translated to anger toward any type of authority, any type of someone trying to control him or tell him what he should do or shouldn't do. Really, I think that created a really deep, I don't know what you would call it, but
complex.
Something that ran very, very, all throughout his life. Right. I think not only until he was practically in his 70s that he kind of was able to get a harness on some of those anger issues and that reactivity. And I don't think he ever stopped having the defiance toward authority or toward being controlled. So that would be kind of my assessment. Yeah,
good. Yeah. When I read about this, about his early life and learned about that, everything made sense to me in terms of his later life. I think we have this thing in our society where we think, well, a successful, famous, loved person, they must have a good self-esteem, right? And they present themselves in interviews like they're confident, and they're in movies, and they're paid a lot, and so they must have high self-esteem. No, he had extremely low self-esteem, and the more I get to know famous people, the more I realize that I've been indoctrinated into that belief that famous people are well put together. But of course, they're just like all of us who wake up in the morning and put both low self-esteems on with, what is this?
One leg at a time.
One leg at a time. And it's just like anyone else. And again, because of Marlon's just terrible, I can't think of a worse scenario for him growing up. I mean, his parents divorced. I think reportedly he had to threaten his father with a gun to stop abusing his mom. And it just sounds awful.
When you add on to the fact that I think by nature he was a very, very sensitive kid.
Yeah.
And then you add on all the things that transpired, but
Right.
he has that almost in his DNA of being this very sensitive soul.
Right.
And I would almost dare to think that famous people, by and large, as compared to the normal population of non-famous people, are driven more by insecurities and not feeling enough and not feeling like, so that's kind of what drives them to achieve these exceptional things and receive attention and validation because they may not have that sense themselves.
Right. They're constantly chasing a validation that normals have just waking up in the morning or something, Yeah. So the things we can say about his psychology emerging from childhood is neglected, emotionally abandoned, emotionally abused, put down, physically abused. He witnesses extreme abuse and violence from his father. He was parentified, is the language we use in my industry, of being elevated in hierarchy above his mom to take care of her. And he seemingly channeled his pain into bad behavior and anti-authority behavior. And he had an anger problem, which is natural. And he was beginning to realize that he could get attention and love by performing for his mother. Okay, so teenage years, he goes to military school. He has more bad behavior, but he goes into acting class and really is, for the first time, finds something that he enjoys and that he gets rewarded for. He drops out. He tries to enlist in the military because it's during World War II at this point, but they don't let him in because he has an old football injury. So at the age of 20, he goes to New York City to become an actor like his sister, and he hooks up with his mother figure, Stella Adler, who was his acting teacher. She was a famous method acting teacher. Do you know anything about her? I don't know.
I don't know a ton about Stella, but yes, you're correct. She kind of became a surrogate mother figure for him, and she was basically the first person in his life to ever say he was good at something and encourage him to do this thing and let him know he had a talent, he had a gift. And that was going 18 years before you really ever hear somebody say you're good at anything. Right. So I think for him, that obviously, I'm guessing, made him more curious about acting and continuing to do it, but at the same time, kind of being welcomed into her actual family and feeling like somebody, I think that it held two appeals for him in that sense.
Right. Yeah. A mother figure, someone giving him self-esteem, like you said, for the first time in his life, feeling good about himself, feeling rewarded for his hard work, and he just pours himself into acting, and he becomes a stage actor and starts to rise in the ranks pretty quickly as a young man, and he is starts to get good critic reviews and this kind of thing, and he's in a stage production of a Streetcar Named Desire, which was later made into the film with the same people, I believe. Actually,
it was Jessica Tandy played the
other woman,
the role in the theater production, and Vivian Leigh played her in the film version.
Oh, okay.
So
you truly know everything. So
don't question me, Kirk.
So this is now we enter the 1950s. Which he's in his late 20s at this point, and he starts to act in movies, and he's a huge sensation right out of the gates. Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, Julius Caesar, The Wild One, On the Waterfront, Guys and Dolls. I've watched all these movies in the past couple weeks, and I loved him in Julius Caesar, man. Just loved him. I mean, that movie as a whole was boring except for him.
Right.
Like everyone else was like, and then every time, like Marlon Brando, just with that furrowed brow that he always has in that movie, and the power with that Mark Antony speech on the Roman steps, he's just like, I mean, it's just amazing. And he took that role because he wanted to prove that he could act, because he was getting a lot of flack for being a hack who the girls were liking or something. And
for kind of playing that bad boy, dangerous. And he was also getting associated with, because he played the character Stanley Kowalski in The Streetcar Named Desire, and it's obviously he's kind of a bad guy, and he was having people associate that character with him as though he had that personality, and that really genuinely kind of upset him. It bothered him that people perceived him as being in any way similar to Stanley Kowalski, and he says he hated that character as a character,
as a person.
Yeah.
The character was physically abusive, rash, brutish, really mean to his
controlling,
to Stella. And I'm so glad that I watched this movie in prep for this, because I finally know the origin of Stella.
I know. Me too. When I saw it, I was like, okay. I get it.
Now all the Simpsons episodes make sense to me. And on the waterfront, which I could have been a contender, I finally understood that scene.
Isn't it funny though how when you grow up hearing these lines from famous movies like that, like On the Waterfront or even in The Godfather, and then when you watch them yourselves, how much more understated they actually are in the film than this impression that people do of it, or that's kind of grown into this thing that's much bigger than it is. He says that, in my opinion, in a very almost just like defeated way. But when you hear people say it, they're like, I could have been a contender.
But it's more like he says, I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody, Charlie. And he's talking to his brother, and it's this really sad scene because his brother is, spoiler alert, 60 years later, his brother's basically telling him, if you don't do what I'm about to tell you, I have to kill you, because the mob is telling me I have to kill you. And, and the face that Marlon Brando is, he's just like, really, Charlie? And anyway, and then, and the Stella moment, it's this truly, pathetic, meaning like sad moment in the movie where he abused his wife, and he's yelling up to his wife saying, Stella, come down here. I'm sorry. I'm a jerk. I'm a terrible person. And she's not. And he's like, Stella. And the passion in that voice when you watch it, it's an incredible scene.
He's just wrecked. Like as a man. Yeah.
Right. It's not, to me, I always thought it referred to some melodramatic, someone screaming at something for no reason, or I don't know. Anyway. So, why do you think at this point, I think I already asked you this, but why do you think he was do you have anything more to say about why you think he was such a big star? Because, there are a lot of actors during this time that you could point to that were great. Why was it that he was he was basically, and I didn't even know this, that he was basically Elvis before Elvis. He was the screaming fans were screaming at Marlon before they were screaming at Elvis. Why do you think he was such a huge star?
Well, I think... for one, I don't know how to articulate this exactly, but when you've met people in your life, or maybe you've even done this yourself at times, where when you really don't care about something, like you genuinely don't care, it will somehow find its way into your orbit, and you can really take it or leave it. But it's like, it happens sometimes with relationships, when maybe you've had a crush on somebody, or you still have feelings for an ex, and then the second that you stop having feelings genuinely for them, then all of a sudden they're super attracted to you. It's a weird convoluted way of explaining the way the dynamic I'm trying to explain. But I think I have to believe that part of it was that he gave absolutely no F's whatsoever about show business, about being popular, about being famous, about even doing movies, really. Like it's so truthfully and so convicted about, how he felt about that business. He was incorruptible. And if it all went away, the next day, I don't think he would have cared. And there's something that's very intriguing about that type of a person, or that type of an attitude. And I don't really think it's something that you can teach someone. I don't think it's,
Well,
you can't
if
even
you
really
try to do that, you're diametrically not doing that because you're trying to
exactly.
do something.
And that's like death to getting the thing that you want is desperately wanting it. So whatever that thing is, however you quantify that, like, I think that was possibly a part of the draw to him.
Yeah.
And that's because he was so different, so very, very different than anyone else, especially in that business at that time.
Right.
But I don't know. For me, it's just, I'll come back to what I sort of said in the beginning was the authenticity thing of, for me, I'm more fascinated with Marlon Brando as a person, as a human being than as an actor, but both are quite fascinating. To me, the person Marlon Brando is just as authentic as the actor Marlon Brando. There's no separating the two. And I've never encountered or witnessed anyone else in my life seems to embody that 100% of the time, no matter what circumstances they're in, no matter what's being said to them or expected of them. It's like this, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like this ultimate, this is going to sound lame, say like ultimate truth. That's not it. It's more like he knew who he was, flaws and all, you know, the good, the bad. He never betrayed who he was for money, for fame, to make someone else feel less awkward in a moment. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of those interviews where he clearly is almost physically uncomfortable being asked about his films, especially as he got later in life. He had less and less patience for being interviewed about those kinds of things.
Yeah, he would sort of mess with them or turn the tables and start asking them questions.
Yes.
And
I don't think he was doing it to be a jerk. I think it was some of it probably for his own entertainment, but he was a very curious person, and I think he didn't see the importance of discussing those things when there were so many other things in life to learn about or to discuss. And sometimes that's why he would talk to one of the interviewers, and I think it was genuinely because he wanted to know something about them.
Right.
You know, he would even say, just because I was in this film doesn't make you any different than I, and like, you have just as many interesting things in your life, you know, to talk about, which was very not something people did back in those days at all.
Right. Yeah. And still don't really. Yeah. You said it really well. And that I thought a very similar thing, except well thought out. I sort of saw him as the 50s version of Kurt Cobain. You know, Nirvana famously hated being famous.
Right.
And as soon as their album became big, they instantly declared that grunge was dead. And I remember when they would say stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, grunge is dead. And I was like, hey, I just discovered grunge. And why are you saying it's dead? And it was because to them, fame meant it was over. You know, like fame, if soccer moms are listening to me, then it's dead. It's now, it's over, you know, and Kurt Cobain, you know, famously would, you know, just seem to, you know, what do they, I'm not good
thumb
with,
your nose.
Yeah, thumb your nose at fame and MTV, and, you know, he'd wear dresses to things, and he pretty quickly cut his hair, and he was really known for that shaggy, you know, locks of hair, and he like pretty quickly cut his hair, and I remember thinking like, man, he's really going against the whole grunge image by cutting his hair. And so I thought Marlon Brando gave off a very similar kind of vibe about just like, you know, just being himself and wasn't going to play the game. At the same time, though, he even said he was very insecure and really wanted validation. And so, and Kurt Cobain, I think, was the same way. I think Kurt Cobain hated fame, but also was chasing that dragon to get validation that he never got from his family growing up. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I was just thinking because in my sort of reading and watching things about Marlon Brando and interviews and such, I know this is going to sound a little bit contradictory, but I don't actually think he sought validation. I don't actually think that was one of his driving factors
from the public.
Yes, outside of his mom and his dad. He would write letters from New York begging them to write him a letter and asking how they were and saying, I'm sure I'd love to see you soon, and, you know, could you just send me a letter? I'm feeling awfully lonely. And they wouldn't, you know. And so I think if there was any validation that he was seeking, it was from his parents. But he he wanted nothing to do with I sound like I'm like the world's biggest Marlon Brando expert. I'm really not, but this is just from what I have observed and watched and read. But he wanted nothing to do with the business of show business, and because it was phony, and he knew they were selling him as a commodity, and he didn't want to be sold as a commodity. But then there was the point in his career where it kind of, after he's used to making a certain amount of money, it's like the more money he made, the more his lifestyle became more expensive, and he had more children with various women. The more he kind of needed to do at least like one picture a year. And I think the more his hatred for acting grew, the more that he kind of became reliant on it financially. And it's sad because when you watch him in some of these interviews and you can see him physically becoming uncomfortable, he would happily answer questions that had nothing to do with films. If somebody just asked him something as a person, or to speak on a topic that he felt passionate about, he would react in a completely different way. And he was fully engaged. And if it was about, so did you think such and such film was going to be as big of a hit? He'd just be looking around the floor and all over the room. And then he might comment to somebody off camera. And, he just did not enjoy it. And in fact, there were times that he said he was even frightened when he would be going. I think the first time he went to the Oscars, the crowd was kind of mobbing him, and I forget who it was, getting out of a car. And he was genuinely like scared by that and almost kind of mad at the crowd a little bit of like, you can't just invade my personal space because I'm this actor person.
My suspicion of that was his physical abuse. Well, I'll provide my suspicion of that after the break. So let's take a break. Okay, we're back. You, Carey, Burbank, expert of Marlon Brando, at least between you and me. You mentioned something I didn't know, that at the Oscars, the crowd was moving in on him, which people do to stars, and he was very uncomfortable with that and a little hostile against that. And my suspicion of that is, which I'll get into more later maybe, is he suffered from PTSD, and what we call complex PTSD, because it was ongoing over time, involving someone that's supposed to love him. His father was, very scary to him and traumatic. And if you've never been through stuff like that, it's hard to imagine, because it's like, well, can't you just be like, well, dad's being dad? But no, it's when you're even up until teenage years, if someone in your family is scary physically in that way with their anger and aggression, it can literally rewire your brain so that whenever there is a threat, it triggers this response of a post-traumatic stress response, and you can become quite deregulated and can become very upset and hostile to get people away from you. And so there were signs of it. I can't remember the exact quote. Maybe I'll find it in my notes here in a second. But he talked about he didn't like being suddenly touched, which is a sign of PTSD. There wasn't a lot of other signs of PTSD. I wish I could talk to him and really kind of go through it, but it would make total sense that he has PTSD.
I do know that he notoriously did not like loud noises.
Right.
Yeah.
Loud noises was another symptom of PTSD. Now, I don't have enough to go on to really definitively say, but it would make total sense to me that he suffered in that way. Also, just one more thing to add to what you were saying, Carey, earlier in terms of his, being a huge star. As a child of an alcoholic family, you become keenly aware of the state of your parents. Because when your parents are in a stable mood, they don't drink as much. And when they're unstable, they tend to drink more. And when they drink more, so not only do you need to know the emotional state of your parents to know if they're going to drink more, but you also need to know how drunk they are. Because, a 5-drink mom is different from a 10-drink mom, which is different from a 15-drink mom. And your entire life as a 5-year-old is dictated by how drunk your parents are. If your parents aren't alcoholic and they're stable from day to day, you don't need to pay attention to your parents' state because they're always the same. But in this instance, when you're a child, you're forced to develop the skill that you shouldn't be forced to develop, which is to become super aware of other people's states. And he seemingly had that. He seemingly was very good at reading people.
Is that at all similar to what I've heard called hypervigilance?
Hypervigilance, often you could apply it to this, yeah, but it more often refers to being very observant, hyper observant of what's going on around you to avoid threats.
Got it.
Essentially. Like that person across the room seems a little upset, and I'm going to keep my eye on that person because that might be a threat to me. So I'll keep an eye. Whereas other people, if they're not suffering from a trauma reaction, might notice that person upset, but it doesn't kind of trigger a response. Sure. This is just general human alcoholic family stuff. You ask any child of an alcoholic and they will say, oh yeah, I was always keenly observant of where my parent was with regards to their drinking and use. And so what this does is it's further neglect, because the child resents this for like, why am I having to take care of my parents? And they're not taking care of me. They're not noticing me. And you also don't develop a keen sense of who you are because you're spending too much time on other people. But you develop this really great skill that you can use. And one of the ways you can use it is to gauge how other people respond to you in a way to manage how they respond to you so you can get their approval, how you walk, how you talk, how you present yourself, your acting style. All those things might have been influenced by this, great skill at reading other people's states.
That is a thing that has been discussed a lot about him, is that he'd pretty much size people up in a matter of seconds. And I'm sure that plays into the charisma, right? Because it's like, you know how to connect with people. You know how to get what you want from them. Or in his case, I think he was more trying to figure out who he was dealing with.
Right. Because when he was a kid, if he didn't know who he was dealing with, his life would completely fall apart. But as an adult, he could use that skill. And he was, shall we say, hypervigilant about, who are you? Can I trust you? Are you a good person? Are you a bad person? Are you against me? Are you for me? And so that affected also, I think, his rise to fame in some ways, and his ability to figure out how to act in a lot of ways. Okay. So just kind of quickly going through his 30s, which I find to be a very interesting time in his life. 1954, 1964, between those years, his mother dies in 1954. And to some, this sort of marks the end of his golden years, which was the early 50s with all those big movies you were talking about earlier, because it was the way, for some people it's like, oh, your mom died, that's really sad. But to him, not only did his mom die and was that sad, but so died the possibility of ever having the nurturing relationship that he ever wanted from her. And that can be 10 times, 100 times worse than the grief of losing your mom. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he made a number of big movies because he was a big star during this time, but none of them were as well liked as his earlier work, which I don't really understand, because I've watched some of these movies and I still think that he's great, in them, and I still think the movies are fine. But for some reason, it maybe it was because people were getting tired of him or something. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I've watched.
They weren't terrible. Do you
know what
I mean?
Some of the commentary that I've heard on some of his, whether it was a bad sort of patch that he had of a number of years of sort of failed films, or why one in particular was a flop. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me in this day and age, because I think just the movies have changed so much. And like you said, you could look at one versus another and not see a whole lot of difference. But I think sometimes in those days, it was, whether it was like a fight between the studios or this such and such thing happening, or him getting a reputation for this.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know because we weren't there at the epicenter of that culture. But I think it was because his fame grew bigger than his acting career in some ways. And I think people wanted to see him kind of fall.
That could be true. I also know that he was starting to become a little bit of a handful on sets and running up budgets, running over budget. at times not wanting to be cooperative about a certain element of the script or story.
Totally.
But it was always because he was trying to fight for something that he believed made the story better. And I have to say, in many instances, I've heard from people who worked with him and they said, and he was usually right. So it wasn't just for the sake of being, a diva, or I think it came from good intentions, but then I'm sure at some point it butted up against that. Oh, they're trying to tell me what I have to do, and no one's going to tell me what I have to do,
Yeah, right. Because when I gave in to authority as a child, it meant extremely bad things for me in terms of my dad controlling every aspect of my family and me. And so therefore I have to be hypervigilant about fighting against that authority because it's a threat. Okay, so in his 30s, first wife, Anna Kishfi, they got pregnant, and so they got married. She was half Indian, half British. So here we get into this woman of color attraction, which is, fine by me. They had one son. She was drinking a lot. They fought a lot. They got divorced. During this time, he was a notorious womanizer. Do you know all the people he reportedly womanized?
Well, I know that they're in the hundreds, if not thousands, but I know some of them. But he, in the biography that he wrote, that I've recently just read, he's actually quite respectful in that he doesn't name the women. He'll tell maybe a story about when I was with this person or this.
Or he's like, it rhymes with Fairlyn from Flo.
He did talk about a little, just like a short love affair that the two of them had, and a couple of other people he named, but most of them were kind of remained anonymous.
Right. God, I wish he would have said it, but just for my own curiosity. But yeah, he, like, rumor had it, or maybe even the women talked about it. Marilyn Monroe, Shelley Winters, which is kind of a funny picture in my head. Grace Kelly, Jackie O. Apparently. I don't know. This is just all internet stuff, but I would believe it because, some of them have been confirmed. He was bisexual, which I had no idea about. He reportedly, do you know of the men that he's rumored to have sex with?
I was really curious when I read the autobiography. He had a biographer write it with him, but it's his words, and it's called Songs My Mother Taught Me, if anyone's interested. I was curious to see if he would touch on that in the book, because he goes into a lot of personal detail, and it doesn't seem like he's attempting to hide anything. And I had heard from other sources that he would sometimes have love affairs with men, including women as well as men. But he never made any reference to that in his book. So I don't know if it's true. I kind of feel like that many people probably wouldn't say it if there wasn't some element of truth to it, but I guess who knows? Yeah.
And I don't know the sources, but from my memory of what I read, it sounded credible that he had been together with James Dean, with Cary Grant, Rock Hudson, and Laurence Olivier. It would make more sense with Rock Hudson. Was Laurence Olivier gay?
I don't know. I don't believe so, but I don't know.
But anyway, or bisexual, I don't know. But if half of it is true, he had sex with, he's probably he's like the Kevin Bacon of sex, like everyone's within 6 degrees of having sex with Marlon Brando. I mean, he just seemed to attract and be attracted to a lot of different people.
I think that speaks a little bit to what I see in his personality of this eye contact that he would make so deeply with anyone that he was working with or being interviewed by or talking to. And this connection that I feel is almost visible, if that makes sense, like watching it on screen. Mm-hmm. Visible, that's not the right word, but like palpable, maybe that's a better way of describing it, of wanting to like see through you into your soul and know who you are, and in a real way, not the outside fluff, not what you want me to think, or not what, but really get right to the heart of a person and being able to admire whatever that is, whether it's a male or female. I could see that potentially being part of his personality. Or I saw this interview with Larry King that he did in the 90s. And even the way he's looking at Larry King, it's like those memes go around, like, I want, my band to look at me the way that such and such looks at this. It's like even the way Marlon Brando was looking at Larry King. And I think he kissed him on the lips at the end of the interview. Because I think...
Well, let's add Larry King to the rumors now, too.
Oh, God. But I just did a
Leave
really...
the suspenders on.
What about the glasses? Glasses off. Yeah, I just did a really horrible job of explaining that. But I think what I meant was him being able to see the beauty in each person, perhaps regardless of gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, people's sexualities are complicated, and maybe he was, quote unquote, born that way. But I think another hypothesis is that he was so anti-authority and questioned authority so thoroughly that he looked at society's rules about sexuality and said, I'm not going to follow that rule. I'm going to explore,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to see, why can't I have sex with men? Society says I'm not supposed to, but I know authority is bullshit.
Right.
And so I'm going to try this out. Is another, again, sexuality is odd and weird.
Right. It's more complicated than that, but it's possible because he when he would talk about, forming your opinions about things, don't listen to what someone else tells you. Don't just take what you've read in a newspaper as fact. Like, figure it out for yourself. Form your own opinion. That's obviously what he did throughout his life. He was a self-taught man, and he was incredibly intelligent, incredibly articulate.
Yeah, he learned French to talk to Tahitians, I believe. And there's an interview on YouTube that I saw where he is fully being interviewed in French. I
have never seen that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's on French TV I don't speak French. I took 3 years of it in high school, which you would think would
you can
amount
say
to something.
Hello, where's the bathroom?
I don't even know those things. I can say that in Spanish. But he famously could speak like 7 languages, many of them pretty well, and was very into philosophy. And there's a lot of interviews that I saw on YouTube of him speaking very intelligently.
He's so eloquent, and he's just any topic you can get him on, and he has such interesting thoughts and theories and perspective on that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Larry King, and maybe some people out there would be waiting for us to talk about the famous interview in which he talks about Jewish people. Do you remember this interview?
I have not watched that one.
Yeah.
Probably because, again, it might taint my opinion of him.
So it's pretty bad. I mean,
he's pretty old at this point, right?
Yeah. He uses, so Larry King is Jewish himself, right?
Right.
And in the end, Larry King, I think, even said, because it was a big controversy, I think Larry King said, look, you're all taking this out of context. Marlon Brando was more than just this quote that you're pulling out. But it's pretty bad. It's just, it's what's interesting is that when it came to black people, when it came to Native Americans, when it came to Asians and Tahitians, he was pretty progressive. Was he perfect in today's eyes? I would say, not likely. But, in terms of his time and being a white guy, he was definitely on the cutting edge. But when it came to Jewish people, for whatever reason, he started talking about how Jewish people are in charge of Hollywood and how they won't allow negative portrayals of Jewish people in movies and he goes on to say, like, you've had negative portrayals, and he used a lot of colorful language, but he said the Jewish Hollywood allows for negative portrayals of white people, of black people, of Asians, but they won't allow for negative portrayals of Jewish people. Now, I have no idea where he was getting this from, but it sounds very quintessential anti-Semitic thought.
Well, that's really interesting to me, only because I have seen interviews with him in the 70s where he actually, it sounds like he was almost giving the exact same type of speech, but he also included Jewish people in that when he was talking about minorities, Native Americans, black people, and he cites, Jewish people. And I've heard, I think, at least one or two where he was more in defense of them as a group that has been marginalized at times. And so that's surprising for me to hear that.
Right. So I think he just talked a lot about a lot of things. And there's a couple quotes. Oh, it's in the Playboy magazine, actually, 1979. That was back when people actually did read Playboy for the articles. It was actually like, kind of a well-known place to read in-depth interviews with people. But so I'll just read the quote.
Okay.
You've seen every single race besmirched, but you never saw an image of the kike, because the Jews were ever so watchful for that, and rightly so. They never allowed it to be shown on screen. The Jews have done so much for the world that, I suppose, you get extra disappointed because they didn't pay attention to that. So I think that's what I was saying earlier. He also said on Larry King in 1996, he said, Hollywood is run by Jews. It is owned by Jews, and they should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering, because they've exploited. We have seen the N-word and the greaseball. We've seen the chink. We've seen the slit-eyed dangerous Jap. We have seen the wily Filipino. We've seen everything, but we never saw the kike, because they knew perfectly well that is where you draw the wagons around. So, again, in terms of the delivery, not so great. And maybe there's a sensitive notion behind all that. But obviously, when you read it, it just comes across as just
it definitely, to me, that smacks of kind of him turning into the old, cranky, slightly losing it man stage, because, and I probably some of that stems from his whole life being this person who says whatever he thinks, does whatever he wants, and for the most part, people are in favor of it. And maybe at a certain point, you just get so used to doing that, but you're not necessarily being as careful with what it is you're saying. Right. Because, like I was saying, referencing an interview that it was in the early 70s on the Dick Cavett show, he basically says a similar type of thing. I don't think he addresses the issue with how the Jewish people are portrayed in films specifically, but he does with all the other, races you just described. And it's in a much gentler, kinder, comes across as much more sympathetic, that he's trying to say it's not fair that these people are portrayed this way and we just accept it as okay or funny, or it's like they're a caricature of what we think of this race or this group of people, and it's not okay. So it's really surprising to read that, but I feel like part of it is a similar message that he spoke about 20 some years prior in a much more articulate way. And the part about the Jewish people, that's a little surprising to me.
Yeah. But. I mean, I'm not going to defend it, and I'm not going to say that it wasn't misguided, what he's saying. It's hard to know, because when you actually listen to the quote, it's not exactly clear what he's saying precisely. Yeah. But it definitely rings of a little insensitivity, at least. Yeah. So I remember hearing about those quotes and being like, oh, Marlon Brando, like the Mel Gibson thing. Like, isn't Mel Gibson like against Jews? You just get these snippets from media. But upon learning the full breadth that I could about Marlon Brando's life, it's like, oh, in context with all of his civil rights work, he stood behind MLK when he gave the I Have a Dream speech. He did the March on Washington. He was heavily involved. He sent a Native American to accept his, to take to refuse the Oscar. He took a number of movies. He did a movie about anti-apartheid. He did Roots. He did all these things in the context of everything. And he said this what he said about Jewish people. It's like, it doesn't necessarily justify what he said, but in the context of everything, it's like, well, he was headed in the right direction in a lot of ways. Yeah. And maybe he got misguided in a couple of ways, or he had a particular thing against Jews. Who knows?
But I think, Stella Adler was Jewish, and so he actually had quite a few people in his life, throughout his life, that were some of the closest friends and people to him. And I think when I saw him on Larry King live, I don't know why we're doing such a deep dive on the Jewish thing, but we're really going for it. Larry King thought he was Jewish, and he was like, well, half. He's like, not really, but like, I identify because kind of growing up in New York around so many Jewish people, I think he said culturally, I identify with them. But what you had just said about that quote from the late 90s coming out a little bit, I would say, insensitive, or probably not the best thing you could have said or the best way of phrasing that. But it's funny because it's almost true to Marlon Brando's line of thinking, in that you shouldn't make an assessment about someone based on something you've read in a magazine or a paper or seen in the press, but do some reading, do some, learning, research, and then decide. Like, don't base it on what someone else has told you.
Right.
So it's almost true to that point of, if you take a look at the whole breadth of his work, his life, where he spent his money and his time, and where he put his priorities, I think it's pretty counter to one insensitive statement about a certain group of people.
Right. Again, we're not going to apologize for anti-Semitism, but
Right.
again, to label him as this bigoted, terrible human being denies the humongous amount of work that he did that was very positive, right? So I want to just touch on a couple things really quick. He had a second wife in 1960 to 1962. Again, she got pregnant. They got married. Mexican-American actress, Movida Castañeda, 2 children. He had several affairs during that. Then during this time, he had a girlfriend, Rita Moreno. Do you know about this? What do you know about this?
I just know that their love affair went on for many, many years, and it was kind of tumultuous.
Yeah.
And I think they would have sort of these big breakups, these big dramatic things, and then they'd get back together. And that went on for many years.
Yeah. It went on for 8 years, from 1954 to 1962, during the time he was married twice. For those of you who don't know the name, Rita Moreno, she's from West Side Story. She's the main Puerto Rican girl. She's the main girl other than the main girl. The girl's like, America, anyway. And she's actually Puerto Rican herself. And she wrote a whole memoir about her life, and she wrote about her time with Marlon Brando. And she said that having sex with him was, quote unquote, earth-shattering, which is actually a trait. I haven't talked about borderline yet. For those who listen to the podcast, they know all I do is ever talk about borderline. But I want to talk about borderline personality a little bit. And I always, whenever I talk about it, I'm talking about not the personality disorder, but I'm talking about the personality trait, which is much more of a broad. You can think of it, the personality disorder, as a subset of the personality type. He uses the word betrayed. It wasn't that he was hurt by his nanny when she left. It wasn't that he was sad or grieving. He felt betrayed. And when your loved ones betray you, humiliate you, wrong you, and that is your narrative, because she did just abandon him, and it is usually associated with abandonment and rejection. You grow up with a sense of you're very easily triggered to feel abandoned and betrayed by other people. Mm-hmm. And when you go through that, you become very needy of affection and love, because you're walking around in this constant state, and I don't use constant lightly, in a constant state of feeling betrayed and hurt and alone. And one of the things that people will often turn to is sexuality as a way of trying to fill that void.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, my understanding of kind of touching on what you're talking about, when people, have some sort of experiences in their upbringing that perhaps cause them to develop, whether it is traits of borderline or kind of what we're talking about with Marlon Brando here, it's like all you internally are desiring is love, trust, safety, affection, and all of these things, but then you end up acting out in a way that prevents anyone from actually truly being close with you. So in his way, it was having multiple women all the time, so that I believe I heard him say this once, where if any one of them were to leave him for some reason, well, he had 4 or 5 others, so he was never truly going to be alone, but he was also never truly what he would describe as like a healthy, loving relationship. He wasn't ever capable of being loved because he would never be true to any of these women, and was sort of constantly self-sabotaging in that way,
right,
of keeping everyone at arm's length, even though you really want the opposite of that.
Right. Because of continual betrayal and then reenacting these chaotic relationships, he and others will develop a very huge distrust of themselves and of other people, to the point where any sign of difficulty will be interpreted as, well, that's it. Or, well, that means they don't love me. Or that's the end of that. And, you know, when you're even in 10-year long relationship, but particularly in the first couple of years, you have to withstand a lot of signs, you know, especially, you know, think about the first 5 dates. It's like, oh, he didn't open the door for me. Jerk. He probably is a, you know, terrible massage. You know, like you hear these stories, people will just like, they'll read into a lot.
Oh, yeah.
You know? Or I texted him, but he hasn't texted me back in a couple hours. What does that mean? You know, you have to be able to, now I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to those questions. Maybe he should have texted you back in 2 hours. But the point is that there's a lot of tiny little threats to, does this person really love me? And you need to be able to withstand those. And when you are like Marlon Brando and have this betrayal, borderline insensitivity, lack of self issue, you will tend to overreact to because you'll feel extremely hurt and will feel justified in reacting against. And so my suspicion is that even though he was deep down desperate for love and affection and stability, most of the women around him, and maybe men, felt very much rejected by him, not the other way around.
Right.
And
Yeah.
which is common to people who, you know, and it's sort of like the perfect storm, because if he did have, you know, borderline traits, he was also extremely good looking and extremely famous, and grew up in the 50s, 60s when there's a lot of free love going on. And so he was like the epicenter of attraction, and at the same time, like the prime rejecter or something, you know?
I'm just curious, in your experience as a therapist, if you've ever, you know, worked with somebody with this type of borderline traits or these kinds of reactions where you're constantly scanning the horizon for threats and overthinking and, you know, what does that mean about me? How do you work with people like that? How do you get them to sort of minimize those instances, or to not get as, I don't know if the word is scared or upset or reactive about when those little things happen?
Good question. Complicated answer. In a nutshell, the prime thing is what we call a corrective emotional experience, where I, as a therapist, provide a stable attachment that they will try to reject, or they'll try to involve me in tests to see whether or not I'm worthy of trust. And I will do everything in my power to prove to this person that I am trustworthy and that I do care and that I am stable. And through that experience into their soul, they internalize, okay, there's one example of one person who I can depend on, who won't let me mess with them, who has boundaries but is close and warm and true. And through that emotional experience, they can begin to believe in the human race again and in themselves. It also involves me reflecting back to them in a way that you would to a 3-year-old, because they weren't given this, in terms of like reflecting emotions and valuing them and letting them be narcissistic a little bit, because that's normal. But other techniques have to do with awareness and emotional regulation and serenity, and avoiding the kinds of behaviors that lead to further abuse. There's also trauma recovery work. It's complicated, but anyway, does that make some sense?
Absolutely.
Is that surprising to you at all, or is that kind of
no? I was just
middle?
Curious as to how you begin to approach that, because it is so prolific. If it could be 100 instances of those in a day, of over analyzing, over interpreting, taking things to mean something about you that have nothing to do with you, that I just find that the process of kind of undoing that wiring to be interesting.
Yeah. The common response is, well, just tell people to knock it off, just tell people to stop doing that. But if it was that simple, they would have stopped it themselves.
Exactly.
It has to do with something deeper than that has to be experienced, And I specialize in borderline personality and have worked with many people. And for therapists out there listening, they know this, is that borderline clients are very difficult to work with. They're very challenging. They can become very aggressive. And like Marlon Brando, they know how to read people. So imagine Marlon Brando coming into my office.
Right.
Okay. And how he would take no shit from me and would try to figure out what I was doing and would call me out on stuff and would try to, mess me up a little bit, and might at some point be like, you're a phony. This is ridiculous. And I, as a therapist, would know what I was dealing with and would not react against him and would let him say things like, so you're upset. I get that. And try to remain stable in that. But I'm still a human being and can still be hurt and can still feel bad about myself. And so because these people are very good at, reading people, and when they get when their trauma is triggered and they feel upset, they attack. And they know how to attack you.
Right, exactly where to hit you.
Yeah, exactly where to hit you. Even a therapist who, presumably has done this, for a long time, like myself, they can absolutely get under my skin because I'm just not very good at protect. Yeah, but I'm also just not very good at protecting myself. I think I'm just not. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, they've made me look into the depths of my flaws, and it's not pretty, and it doesn't feel good, but I have to remain stable for them, and I'll get my help with my own therapist or something. But over time, the idea is that they internalize our relationship and begin to heal from that severe trauma regarding their own parents growing up, But it takes a long time, and most therapists avoid it because it's, gives you a lot of stress.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay, so back to Rita Moreno from West Side Story.
Now, what did she call their sex? Earth-shattering?
Earth-shattering.
Okay.
She actually goes into quite detail.
Did you need to do another impression of that? Or
yeah.
Are we good?
Earth-shattering! I don't know why people sing when they're in bed, but don't judge me. This is a judgment-free podcast. She said that Marlon Brando was very needy. She said that he needed women to love him, which is consistent with Borderline. She said he was frequently betrayed by her. Sorry. She said he frequently betrayed her emotionally, which is ironically what happens with people with borderline is their very fear is what they, make other people go through. She said she dated Elvis, but she only did so to make Brando jealous. And she got pregnant, and he forced her to get an abortion, and he was insensitive about it, apparently. And when he fell in love with his third wife, which I'll get into in a second, she was terribly hurt. And she found his sleeping pills in his house, and she tried to kill herself by swallowing them. Brando's assistant found her and saved her life by taking her to the hospital. She woke up in the hospital, and she never rekindled her off-and-on relationship with Marlon Brando. I just think that's fascinating. She wasn't just in West Side Story. She was in a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
And I just find that to be just someone should make a movie about Rita Moreno and Marlon Brando, I just think that would be the most interesting movie of all time. So third wife, Tarita Terry Ipaya. I don't know how to pronounce that. Longest relationship, 10 years they were together. I think they got pregnant, and just like all the other women, and he married her. She was from Tahiti. She was a lot younger than him, 18 years younger. This is when he was filming Mutiny on the Bounty, which was near Tahiti, apparently. Tahiti's in the South Pacific. Mm-hmm. And he fell in love with Tarita, and he fell in love with Tahiti. It was, for the first time in his life, he felt like he found peace. Mm-hmm. Have you heard his accounts of this?
Yeah, he describes it as, because the people in Tahiti had no sense of who he was as a movie star. They don't really have a concept of anything like that in their culture at the time. And for someone to even be slightly arrogant, they would just get so ridiculed and made fun of that they would stop putting on whatever airs. So it was just a kind of a society where people just did not, it was very, equal. And he just said that he could see joy in their eyes. They were very joyous people who obviously lived, very simply, and they appreciated the simple things. And right. He said like the sunsets and the beauty of the island was just like nothing he'd ever seen before. And so, yeah, he had this peaceful contentment that he'd never felt before. And I think enjoyed that people just treated him like anyone else for the first time in, most of his adult life. Right. And he ended up buying an island out there, a small island, and spending a lot of his later years in life out there and doing things to help the Tahitian people.
Yeah. And it also, is possible, in addition to all that, which I didn't know all that his nanny was half Indonesian, which she might have looked a little Tahitian to him. And so that might have been an additional resonance that he felt upon, going there. People, I hear this. I know I have friends of mine who grew up in difficult addict, alcoholic homes. And upon going to like Hawaii or Fiji or something, I've heard similar accounts from them of just this serenity that they find out there on the beach and surfing, and they stay there, and they love the people. The like you say, the kind of simple is a funny word, but just like non-complicated, way of living, hang loose kind of a thing. And it seems that Marlon Brando really fell for that and really valued that. And in a way, it's like the first happy element to his story, of this up until this point. It's like you can't really point to anything and say like, yay, Marlon. But this, it's pretty clear that he finally found something that's just like, oh, I can breathe here.
I think that was the starting point of him, because he was a man that was constantly searching, constantly. I mean, he said he spent hundreds, if not millions of dollars in like psychotherapy. And he was constantly searching for not only answers about why are we here, what is life about, but himself. Why did I end up this way? How did my childhood affect me? Why do I respond this way in these types of circumstances? Always curious, always searching, always learning. And I think he eventually got to this point where he was able to forgive his father and undo a little bit of the rage. He started meditating and kind of started drifting away from some of the habits in his younger years in terms of behavior and issues that were sort of stuck in him. And I think the beginning of that was sort of finding Tahiti and then kind of going from there in terms of how his life, I think, got a little more peaceful as he got older.
There's a thing about that I want to mention that we haven't talked about yet, which is he hated his father. We've established that. His father was a terrible human being, physically abusive, alcoholic, traveled a lot, abandoned his family, cheated on his wife.
He also lost all of Marlon's money when he was older.
That's what I want to get to.
Oh, sorry.
He, and maybe you know more details about this, in Marlon, I think this was still in the 50s or something-ish, or maybe early 60s. Marlon's business and money affairs were getting kind of big, and so he handed over all of his affairs to his father, which is, when I heard that, I was like, what? But makes total sense. And then his father proceeded to lose all of his money. But it makes total sense because, again, he's a human being, Marlon Brando, and to the day he died, probably just so desperate for approval and closeness with his parents. And he was willing, even though his dad made fun of him for being an actor, said only women and homosexuals are actors. That's not a real man's job. Was always putting him down and just I just hate this guy, Mm-hmm. And then he hands his entire business. There's even an interview. Have you seen it with the two of them?
Yeah, when he was, they're in Marlon's house.
I don't know where they are, but yeah, Marlon's a little younger, and it's him and his dad, and they even have like a little fight on camera.
It's like a little shtick of play fighting, but if you watch, you can see there's so much subtext in Marlon's face when the interviewer asks his dad, did he have the normal upbringing as a child? And you can tell Marlon's really
kind of looking at him, and then his father's like, yeah, it was a normal upbringing anyone could have, and Marlon's like, oh boy.
Well, he said something to the effect of, I think he may have had a little more trouble with his parents than most kids, and that's when Marlon's eyes are like, they kind of...
Oh yeah. He was like saying like, he was kind of a willful child, as a dad. I wonder why I was a willful child, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, just so interesting, it just explains so much about his behavior and how intense of a human being he was, and his relationship. I don't know. I just, like you, I'm more fascinated with his personal life than his working life, which is also fascinating. So I want to get into some last points here, but before we do that, let's take a little break. All right, we're back with Carey Burbank, expert on Marlon Brando, or, someone that knows a lot more than I do. And I want to talk about it. We can't talk about Marlon Brando without talking about how he gained a lot of weight throughout his career. What are your thoughts about that?
It makes me, it's just one more reason that I sort of really feel for this guy in terms of kind of the way his life went. I think instead of alcohol, he turned to food. He had basically a food addiction, and it was somewhat problematic in his earlier days, but I think he could pretty much keep it under control. He would occasionally show up for a film a little larger than he was supposed to, or I think I heard on Mutiny on the Bounty, he went through 53 pairs of pants because he kept splitting the back of them. And
right. It's funny because if you watch the movie, he's actually not that big.
No.
But to the time, he was huge.
Right.
And he was in charge of this, or he was being very difficult this is when his difficulties as an actor really started to blossom.
Yeah.
And he was so insecure about his weight that he wouldn't come out of his trailer. I don't know if it was this movie or it was another one, or he would demand certain angles be only shot of him because he was so insecure about his weight. So he wasn't like a happy, plump dude. Every pound made him feel extremely ashamed of himself.
Yeah.
And I agree that he likely channeled, when you grow up with alcoholism, you associate alcohol with just terribleness. You just look at alcohol and you're just like, alcohol is a terrible, terrible thing for weak people. So you avoid that. But you have the internalized and maybe even the biological disposition towards addiction. And so you're more vulnerable to other kinds of addictions like work or food or, some other substance. And that seemingly was his vice, was food. And it's common when you have a frequent, imagine on a daily basis, everyone out there, if you're not borderline, because I know we have some borderline, not clients, but listeners, imagine one of the days in which you felt the worst about yourself because you were rejected. You got fired, you got dumped, you got divorced, someone said you look terrible, you're in a date and someone says, I don't think things are really working out, you're not really my type. Just that sinking feeling of shame and rejection or betrayal, or the day someone said that they cheated on you, or the day you found out someone cheated on you. I mean, these just, it's a terrible, ugly, shameful, horrible feeling. People that have borderline personality feel this way every day. Every day you feel that way. Well, if you're in that state every day, it's going to be hard to stay on a diet. Because I'll tell you, for my life, for me to stay on my diet, everything's got to be going perfect in my life. I mean, I have to be fully rested. I got to be like top self-esteem. I've got to get energy. People got to be treating me right. My internet connection's got to be pretty good. Anything that gets out of whack, and I'm going to be like, it's a cheat day, because it's a little treat I can give myself to make myself feel good. Yep. And Marlon Brando rarely felt good and turned to food in all likelihood as a way to just give him a little bit of happiness. Mm-hmm. And when you add that up over decades and decades, you just see a slow progression of gaining weight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad because I think you're exactly right. And I think I read or saw somewhere this employee of his, probably kind of like an assistant at his house, said that this was near the end when he was really, really pretty big. He would actually make this this employee of his padlock his refrigerator shut and did not have a key to it. But he said he would come over the next morning and it would still be locked, but then there'd be a bunch of empty ice cream containers and Big Mac wrappers because he would have like paid someone to go get it, or he would have had someone at the McDonald's deliver them to his house. It was like a common thing. And so even when he was trying to stop himself, he couldn't stop himself. And that's what I think is heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's true addiction.
Yeah.
It's one thing to sneak a little bit of like one cookie. It's another thing to go to the lengths of having someone padlock your fridge, and then you call Jimmy down at McDonald's and say, could you drive over a bunch of food for me? You know, that's rock bottom right there in terms of, you know, and so, and I always thought he was proud of his gaining weight, you know, like before I looked into it. But the more I looked into it, it was like clear that even when he was just slightly
You're not
overweight.
kidding. Yes, there's this one brief little interview he's doing with this really attractive lady, and you can tell he's a little bit smitten with her because he's just really staring at her face. She's quite beautiful.
Is this when he's eating a steak at a restaurant?
I don't think he's eating at the moment, but they believe they had a luncheon, and so it might be the same one. Yeah. But she is, I forget exactly what she says to him, but he gets a little bit flustered and he's grinning, and then because she pays him a wonderful compliment, and it's kind of over the top, so he's getting a little embarrassed, and then he kind of chuckles to himself and he says, have you seen me nude? And everyone starts laughing, and he says, I'm getting so fat. And like at that point, he was not fat in the slightest. Yeah. So he was clearly concerned about it, even when it was, you know, a very minor thing.
Standards are different back then. And he also might have just had a particularly sensitive time to that. I mean, I'm a huge Beatles fan, as the listeners know. And John Lennon, in the beginning of the Beatles' career, was known as the fat one.
What?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Oh, totally. John Lennon was known as the fat Beatle. But if you look at Beatles 1963, 1964, it's like he is not fat. He's just not rail thin like the other guys.
It's kind of like the Three Stooges, where Curly was the fat one, and you look at him now, you're like, he's like 30 pounds overweight. Like it's not, he's like average by today's standards.
Yeah. Oh boy. So another thing about gaining weight that I just want to throw in there that some people might be, you know, thinking about, which is when you're sexually abused, and one could look at his history, and again, I can't talk to him, I don't know. There could be signs of what we might frame as sexual abuse in terms of sensuality between him and his nanny. We don't know. You know, I don't want to shame, you know, affection physical between children and their caregivers. But it might have been akin to sexual abuse. Maybe he saw his father sexually abusing his mom. I mean, who knows? But one of the ways that people will manifest that trauma is through eating disorders or eating problems and weight gain. Not only as a way of trying to fill that void and try to cope with the trauma reaction, but also as a way of trying to push people away from you. The bigger you get, the farther people move away from you physically, you know, and people know that. It's a problem in our society that we shun people that have extra fat cells, but it's a way of getting people to get away from you. Don't touch me, don't look at me, I'm now overweight. This is not a common syndrome, but I just wanted to throw it out there as a possibility.
Yeah.
So just some other details that I wrote down in my notes here. In his later years, he became kind of lazy as an actor. He refused to learn the script, and he wrote his lines in places that you couldn't see. So on the film, so he would have people hold up cue cards, or he would write the lines like on the set so he could. And there's this scene in The Godfather when he's talking to Al Pacino, and he's giving Al Pacino advice about keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. It's all that whole scene. And you see Al Pacino, or you see Marlon Brando looking off screen whenever he talks, and that's because he's reading a freaking cue card.
I know.
It's crazy, and he still is amazing.
I know.
As an actor.
That's what blew my mind. Was I knew he started doing that in his later years because he did care about The Godfather, but most of the films he didn't care about. He was just doing it for the money.
Yeah.
But when I saw that, because I didn't know it when I first saw The Godfather, that he was reading the lines.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind because I thought it was such an amazing acting performance.
Yeah.
Which it was, but to know he's just reading the lines.
Right.
He's still acting, but it's like, man, oh man, imagine if he had really spent a lot of time with this or, really dove into this character in the same ways he did, in the early days of his acting.
Right.
But he was still phenomenal. It was still just...
Yeah, it's just amazing to think about a guy who could pull that off, So, as you were mentioning, he started really demanding bigger paychecks. And it's hypothesized or maybe even known that that's because he'd been married and divorced 3 times and had
10 kids.
So I found all these different accounts of how many kids he had.
Oh boy.
And so these are all quotes. At least 9 children. Another quote, at least 11 children. Another quote I read, 16 known children. Another quote, 17 or more children.
Boy.
One of his possible kids might be Courtney Love's mom.
What?
Did you know that? So Courtney Love might be Marlon Brando's granddaughter. So yeah, he had to pay a lot of money apparently for alimony and child support, and so he started demanding these big paychecks. He was supposed to be in Godfather 2 in these sort of flash forwards, but because he was demanding like millions and millions of dollars, the studio refused to pay him. He famously, in Superman 1978, Christopher Reeve, the star, Superman, was only paid $250,000, which is a lot. But Marlon Brando got paid almost $4 million.
Wow.
And Brando is a small part in that movie. He's in the first 10 minutes, and then he, kind of chimes in now and then, kind of like Obi-Wan, And Brando successfully sued the makers of Superman for $50 million because he felt cheated out of his share of the box office profits. So he became very concerned about earning a lot of money in his later years when in the beginning of his career, he didn't seem to really care about that. Also, we should mention Apocalypse Now. What do you know about... I'm thoroughly confused about what was going on. I mean, I'll tell you what I do know. He was in the, this is around the same time as Superman. He was difficult. He refused to learn the script. He argued about the ending. He gained a lot of weight. Coppola had to shoot a body double, from far away shots because apparently Marlon Brando was too big to be believable as a colonel in the army or Marines or whatever. And, but this movie and his role is so shrouded in insanity. On one level, I'm like, was everyone insane and was he insane, or is it just apocryphal, or what do you know about Apocalypse Now?
I have never seen the film. I have seen half of it. I really need to watch the whole thing. That's the kind of odd thing about me I'm realizing as I'm talking to you is, for as much as I appear to know certain things about Marlon Brando, I've really only seen maybe 3 or 4 of his films. And I don't know if that's because, like we've talked about, I'm more interested in who he is as a person versus as an actor. And maybe because he had such a disdain for acting, it's almost like to just pay attention to his films is, doing the opposite of what he would have wanted. But
well,
not that I'm consciously thinking
Apocalypse Now is not a great movie. I mean, some people love it.
Yeah.
And there's some great scenes for sure. But it suffers from its production problems, especially the ending. I think at the time it was just like mind blowing,
sure,
right? Because it was like, whoa, what's happening? And like it's anti-war and it's like dark and this new look at Vietnam and American colonialism and stuff. But it doesn't really hold up. So you're not missing much, is the point.
I still will probably watch it because I have heard, like some of the stories that you had just described there, and knowing that it's funny because Francis Ford Coppola he actually fought for Marlon Brando to be in The Godfather. The studios did not want him because of the reputation he had built up for causing so many issues and, pushing films over budget and behind, and it was like an immediate no way. And so it's kind of a long story, but eventually he had Marlon Brando do a screen test at his house, and when Coppola showed the execs or whomever it was the screen test, they didn't even know it was Marlon Brando because he had stuffed his cheeks with Kleenex and he put shoe polish in his hair and he changed, his physicality. And so obviously they eventually ended up hiring him, but he didn't really hardly get paid anything for that film. That was part of the agreement. And they worked really well together. And so working together again on Apocalypse Now, I think Coppola, it appears, has mixed feelings, but I think he still has a positive overall take on Brando, at least from what I've heard and witnessed, but that's not everything. So it seems as though it had to do with Marlon hadn't read the book and he hadn't read the script when he showed up. And so they spent about a week just talking. A week of, it was supposed to be film time talking. Yeah. So crew, everyone is there. The money meter is already running. And my take on it is, in the end, I believe that because of the decisions that Marlon Brando felt were important to the film, and as well as Francis Ford Coppola, it kind of ended up being somewhere in the middle of where it was supposed to be, and I think where Marlon wanted it to be. And part of that was because, like you said, they couldn't shoot him because he gained so much weight. And I think that Francis Ford Coppola said that he would just kind of feed Marlon these little seeds of an idea about a scene and then just film him, and he would just improvise for 20, 30 minutes or so, and that was kind of a big part of where his role in the film was not necessarily always scripted.
Right.
But it seems to have gotten, I feel like most people I know regard that as one of like the great films, but
yeah, totally. I am not a huge fan. Maybe if I grew up in that time and saw it or something.
That's what's hard is I think we have such a different sense now, films, and not only the content, but the way that they're made are so different and so much more fast paced now, that when you go back and you watch an old movie, sometimes you're thinking, why did everyone say this was such a great movie? It seems very slow. It seems very schlocky, or, but that's just where
well, even The Godfather, when I saw it growing up, I loved it, and so I still love it. But younger people will say, I saw The Godfather, I couldn't get through, I fell asleep. And I was like, how dare you fall asleep during The Godfather? I mean, that's terrible. It's sacrilegious. But then I was like, compared to today's movies, it is probably, a little slow. And
yeah.
But yeah, okay. So anyway, there's a lot of weird stories about Apocalypse Now. They made an entire documentary, Heart of Darkness, I think it's called. Here's my little analysis of this time in his life. And it's hard for me to know, obviously, but I think what happened was, it just as a guess, was he was well known for being difficult on set. He was well known for being one of the best actors of all time. He was well known for his womanizing and his manizing and his antics. And it was at a time, we're talking 60s, 70s, when improv was big and like being real was big, and like experience and humanistic psychology and primal screaming and anti-establishment. There's a lot of chaos, and he's supposed to be like the best, most interesting, most dynamic, and then he's asked to be in this the second Coppola movie, where Godfather was like the sensation. I mean, we still talk about it today, and it came out in 1972. And there's just all this pressure on him to like be something transcendent in this second movie with Coppola, and it's about Vietnam, and it's this, it's supposed to be this delving into psychology, and it's not just supposed to be a movie about the story. It's supposed to be like a delving into the human darkness of our minds, And he's supposed to, and the whole movie is about finding Colonel Kurtz.
Right.
And then once you find him finally up the river, it's supposed to be this fantastic, it just was too much pressure. And I think he kind of overthought it, And I think he got too wrapped up in like, I want to do this. I want to get paid. I want to, give a good performance, but the script is kind of bad. there's a lot of pressure. You know, someone needed to step in and say, Marlon, here's the script. I need you to act this part because it fits within the larger story of this movie. Now, again, maybe some people will say, no, Marlon's, you know, his performance was perfect and everything went correct the way that it did. But to me, it wasn't that way. Of course, we get the classic improv line, the whore, you know.
Yeah.
But I particularly didn't like his scenes in Apocalypse Now.
Well, now that makes me really want to watch it.
Yeah. Oh, dude, you have to. Yeah, and the documentary. Okay, so let's kind of race through the ending here. Late career in his late 50s until he died at the age of 80. So 1980s, 1990s. Several terrible movies, including the infamous The Island of Dr. Moreau, but some good ones. A Dry White Season, which I think is about apartheid. The Freshman with Matthew Broderick. I
haven't seen that, but I want to.
He plays Vito Corleone.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's like a satire. Right?
Yeah. The Score, which I really like with Edward Norton and Robert De Niro, which is final movie in 2001. I really like that movie. That's a great, just standard heist movie. Edward Norton is at his most Edward Norton-y,
Yep.
During this time in his late career, he had 3 nominations and 1 win for the Golden Raspberry Award. He had 1 Oscar nomination, I think for the Dry White Season. Still difficult to work with. The Score was directed by Frank Oz from Muppets, and famously Marlon Brando was very terrible to Frank Oz and called him Miss Piggy, which is not nice to say, and refused to take direction from him, and toward the end of when he was acting in the movie, refused to have Frank Oz even in the room. And so he would make Robert De Niro give him direction.
Interesting.
Imagine you're trying to direct a movie and one of the stars is saying you can't be on the set, even though you're the director. Yeah.
That's not good.
His 4th partner during this time, Maria Cristina Ruiz, who was his housekeeper, but he had 3 children with her. So there's that. Okay, so I really want to get into something at the end of the episode here that I just think is just a fascinating story. It's 1990. His daughter, Cheyenne. What do you know about this story?
What I know is his daughter, Cheyenne, who was, I believe, his 2nd child with his 3rd wife.
The Tahitian.
The one he met in Tahiti.
Yeah.
Cheyenne, she was beautiful.
Yeah.
To me, she's the child that I've seen pictures of that looks the most like Marlon Brando. She's just this gorgeous girl.
Well, everyone knows that half Asians, which she was, are the most beautiful people.
Oh, is that what they say? Yeah.
That's what I say.
She it sounds like she had bit of a troubled life. I think she suffered with some depression and a little bit of just some kind of difficulties.
Right. Just to chime in on that, in general, Marlon Brando, although intellectually loved his children, was not there for his kids growing up. And he felt very shameful of that and very bad about that, but at the same time did it. He fathered many children that he wasn't there for, very similar to the way he was treated by his parents.
Sure.
Which is what we all do. We tend to recreate the problems that we had when we were growing up. So, okay. So
she's kind of a troubled child, and he actually did spend, I believe he spent the most time with the 2 children, because they were together for 10 years. And she was...
So if you would have pointed to Marlon to say, who are your real kids? It would be...
Which ones really count?
It would be Cheyenne and Cheyenne's brother.
Probably. He was really close with her, and I think he tried to get her help and save her from herself in a way, but she eventually did end up... Well, there was one instance that happened prior to that, which her boyfriend, they got pregnant. I believe she was in her early 20s, and Marlon just wanted to see what kind of guy this person was, so he sent her older half-brother, Christian, to just kind of, give him the old once-over and check him out, see if it was a guy that they wanted her to be with.
Right. So I want to dig down on this, because I think this is a critical part in the story.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it's described. It's like, give him the old once-over or whatever it is. But to me, it's like, if I'm a dad and I'm a little upset that my angel has been impregnated by this random dude that I don't have a relationship with, I'm going to be like, who the hell is this guy? How dare he? To me, I think there's more to that story. I mean, what do you think?
There probably is. And I actually want to say, I think that the family knew this. I believe his name was Dev. I want to say his name was Dev.
Dag. His name was
Dag. The guy who...
Dag Drolet.
Right.
A Tahitian guy.
I want to say that he was friends with Cheyenne's brother, or somehow maybe Christian knew him. Somebody knew him. He had been around, and I think Marlon was just wanting to get a read on what kind of a guy he was. That was my understanding, but I could certainly be wrong.
But Christian, who is desperate for his father's approval, because everyone was, particularly his kids, particularly because he didn't give them enough attention growing up. Christian's like, okay, I'm going to do right by my dad. But he brings a gun.
Yeah.
So that's the part where I'm like, if Marlon was just like, hey, just go question him, see if he's on the up and up. And then Christian's like, okay, I'm going to bring a gun. Either Christian's an idiot, or Marlon was like, look, I need you to really confront this guy and scare him and like really make sure he's on the up and up. Or I want you to go to this kid and tell him he's got to get out of my daughter's life. Because that's the part where I'm thinking maybe that's what happened. Again, I have no evidence of this.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
But anyway, so Christian...
At any rate, apparently there was some kind of I think it's reported as they kind of got into a little bit of a wrestling match, and the gun went off accidentally and shot Dag, and he died. So Christian actually got sentenced, I believe it was like 10 years in prison for that. Right.
Just like you said, Christian shoots Dag, shoots him in the face, by the way.
Ooh.
And as you say, the account is there's a wrestling match, but we just really don't know. Marlon was there and tried to give CPR to Dag. I don't know if it's pronounced Dag, but it's spelled like Dag. Didn't work, obviously. Marlon then calls the police, and there's a famous trial in the before OJ, big trial. Robert Shapiro was Christian's lawyer. Just like OJ's lawyer. Have you seen the video of Marlon giving testimony?
I have. Because some people said that he was acting when he was up there. Is that kind of what you're wondering? Or just...
And just what he was saying.
Oh. Yeah, I think he broke down when he was up there, and he sort of blamed himself in a way, because he said Christian had a pretty bad upbringing, just between the marriage falling apart, the mom drinking a lot, him not being around. He was kidnapped at one point. Like... There was a lot of issues with their custody battles with him. I think he had kind of a tough life.
Christian was kidnapped?
I believe he was kidnapped by the mother and held somewhere to get some ransom money, or to somehow get some kind of something that she wanted in the custody battle. Oh, no. But it was not to be traced back to her, but it was. Oh. So I think the kid, he had not the greatest upbringing, and I think Marlon felt bad about that. So he was... Not to say that it would justify, him shooting someone, but that perhaps his lack of being there for him, or being a good father, or providing more guidance or whatever, he might not have brought a gun to this, meeting with this guy, or he may not have acted in the same way.
Well, the whole thing wouldn't have happened if Marlon had said, Christian, go to, question this kid.
So...
And how traumatic that must have been for everybody.
So yeah, he broke down on the stand, and it was moving, but I think some of the reporters were like, oh, he was just acting to try to get his son off, but
which, again, if you know nothing about Marlon Brando's life, it's like, yeah, maybe he because he's a scumbag and he's difficult to work with, and he's some kind of psychopath who hates Jewish people, then but again, knowing the full breadth of his life, I think it was absolutely genuine.
Yeah. And especially in his later years, he really made a point to spend a lot of time with his kids in the last, 10 or so years of his life, and to kind of make up for some of that lost time.
And presumably he was asking Christian to go to Cheyenne's boyfriend to question him, because he loved Cheyenne so much and was trying to protect her. And maybe he was even trying to like bond his Christian with the family, and, just trying to, let's be a family, and it all...
Well, and that's not even the worst of it.
Right. Then what happened?
Did I cut you off where you wanted to say something?
Go for it. But you were right. So Christian is convicted 10 years in prison, which is awful for Marlon Brando. And then what happened?
And then a very short time later, Cheyenne ends up committing suicide. And so it was kind of a double blow for him in terms of essentially losing 2 children.
Right. So Cheyenne, having witnessed her boyfriend, the father of her children, maybe the love of her life, get killed by her half-brother at the sort of orders of her own father, and she's depressed. She has a young child, so she's depressed, and she hangs herself in Tahiti. And now Brando's like, just the tragedies that are happening to him in his life. It's just terrible. Yeah, and then a decade later, he died. That's quite of a bummer of a ending there for us. That's the end of my notes, of which there were 15 pages, which I'm sure everyone could tell it was long. But what's the final word on Marlon Brando? And remember, you're an expert, Carey Burbank.
Right. I have a laminated printout that I made myself in clip art saying I'm the #1 Marlon Brando expert in Whatcom County. I feel like it's hard to sum his life up and the person that he was up succinctly, because there's just so many things that happened to him, so many things he did, so many contradictory elements of his personality. And that's why I think I'm so fascinated with the guy, because it seems like you could keep learning more and more and more about him and keep finding more and more layers and more interesting and stories. And because that's the other thing too, I feel like we did kind of go down a dark path for some of that, but he was also known as someone that was a big laugher, practical joker, loved to goof around and have fun, and especially on sets, like prank people, and if he could get a laugh out of somebody, I think that was like his favorite moment, of, especially he talked about making his mom laugh. He used to do some crazy things. Like he used to have a raccoon in his apartment in New York when he was like 20 years old as a pet. And one time it got out and crawled across the ledge into the neighbor's bathroom. And I think he like crawled across the ledge after it, or he talks about hanging from like 11 stories to just amuse people at a party. He's like, I would never do that now. It's crazy, these things I did as a kid. But he just had such a wild and interesting and rich life. But at the same time, I'm intrigued by just the way his mind worked and the way he thought about things and explored and never stopped being curious, like all the way up to the end. He was famous for calling certain people that he just maybe saw in a film or in an interview and found interesting for some reason. Call them at 3:00 in the morning and talk to them for 3 hours on the phone. And a lot of times the first reaction was like, this isn't Marlon Brando. Right. But then we'd call back. I
think he was sort of like Prince in that way. Like everyone has like a Prince story.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I think he was sort of like that.
I mean, he's obviously an eccentric guy. Some of his friends who knew him from way back in the day, when he would often just do these, whether it was kind of these crazy stunts, or maybe they would be at a party and he would say or do something that's completely socially inappropriate but would crack everybody up, or make someone feel very uncomfortable. They would wonder if he was doing these things just to play some sort of joke on everyone, or if he was just genuinely like that, like he just genuinely couldn't help himself from doing those things. And it wasn't with any sort of pretense or with the objective of getting a rise. It was just, this is how his brain worked and this is what he wanted to do, so this is what he was going to do. And most of them came to the conclusion that no, that was just the way he was wired. Like he just did whatever he did or said whatever he said almost to kind of amuse himself, or because that felt like the thing to do in that moment. And the last thing that I will say about him that I really admire is when we've seen him in some of these interviews where he's not willing to really go there in terms of talking about a film he's made and talk about it for the 1900th time, the way that he could sit there after being asked a question and just either say, oh, that's not really something I want to talk about, and then it just hangs there and there's awkward silence and you can see the host not knowing what to do. And I know for myself, and perhaps this is true of most people, like you would feel the need to say something, or you would try to make it, you sort of know what your role is there. You've come onto the show to promote this thing or to talk about this thing. And the comfort in your own skin that it must take to sit there and be on national television and be, interviewed by some of the most famous people, and to not succumb to the pressure of what they want you to say and to talk about what they want you to talk about, but instead just stick true to yourself and what feels okay to you. Like, that takes some balls. That's another thing. I don't think I've ever seen anyone in my real life exhibit that kind of absolute, what to me reads as comfort in your own skin, that you don't feel the need to validate this person. You don't feel the need to make this moment less awkward, or, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Do you ever think WWMD when you're living your life? You know
what's really funny is, like, right before I got here, my husband texted me and said, have fun, doing this podcast. And if you get nervous, just remember WWMD. I'm not joking. I can show you the text. I responded with, well, he would probably want to talk about Native American causes, but
yeah, that's what Marlon would do.
Yeah.
He would derail and advocate.
Yes. But I do long for some point in my life to be able to harness a little bit of whatever that is, to just be kind of unflappable in yourself as a person and not feel the need to succumb to what other people expect of you or want from you, but you're not comfortable giving.
Yeah. I respect that. I like that. It makes me wonder, what does it say about me in terms of the people that I love in my life? I mean, I have a new love for Marlon Brando, but it's new. But it's like, I love Paul McCartney and John Lennon, so it's like, why? What is it about me? What personality trait am I trying to absorb from them? It's interesting to think about.
Do you think that's what it is? Do you think it's...
Yeah.
That's what it is for you? That's what it feels like?
Yeah, I think that I talk about this with my students. The age group of people who idolize famous people the most are teenagers, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why that is because teens are the most insecure people on the planet. Mm-hmm. And they're desperately looking for someone to aspire to give them the internal sense or hope or something of having self-esteem and having a direction and having people accept you and, appreciate you. And as we get older, we get less of a sense of idolizing, mm-hmm. Those sorts of people. And, but we never give it up, right?
Yeah.
And it makes total sense. I think Marlon Brando's, the way that you're seeing him, is absolutely someone we could all look up to as someone that was authentic, mm-hmm. who was real, who said what he wanted to say, and sometimes made mistakes, and didn't do what everyone wanted him to do, and rejected. Like, he was supposed to play Genghis Khan in that movie that John Wayne played. And I'm so glad that John Wayne was the one who played Genghis Khan with this, the eye makeup to make him look Asian. He didn't take that role because he wanted to take a social conscious role. I think Burn was the movie. And he wanted to make movies that had a political statement, Mm-hmm. And I feel like we could all follow in his footsteps, which is not what I thought I was going to come to when I thought I was going to find insanity.
He's just a big jerk.
Yeah. Big racist, insane dude who gained weight. I thought that's what I was going to find, but I think there's a lot to admire about him.
And I agree with you. And I've asked myself at times, like, why do you... I don't think I have an obsession with Marlon Brando, and like I said, I haven't even seen probably 1/4 of his films. But it's him as a person that, like, I'm reading, this book, I'm watching the documentary, Listen to Me, Marlon. Anything I can find online, I'm watching, and I could watch them. I seriously watch Listen to Me, Marlon at least like once a month, usually when my husband's out of town.
Jacuzzi, with the candlelight, little champagne.
Exactly. But I think this is going to seem a little bit disconnected, but I will bring it back around. So I've done a little bit of acting in my life, kind of starting as a little kid, just taking my parents' VHS cameras and making home movies and talk shows and skits and things just for the fun of it. And in some of my adult life, I've dabbled a little bit here and there and had an agent at one time. And don't worry, I haven't done anything important. But I really enjoyed the process of taking classes and learning about acting and going through a lot of these exercises. But I never really liked the whole going on auditions and, oh, am I going to book that Tulip Casino commercial? Like, I always just felt like embarrassed about that stuff and didn't really want to get the parts in those types of things. So I eventually just sort of quit that, but I continued with this one acting workshop that I do probably every 3 months, because really it kind of reminds me a little bit of when Marlon Brando talks about being at the new school for social research where he met Stella. To me, it's like we explore in that workshop what it is to be human. And so you're really opening up, and the exercises that we do, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And I feel like it makes me a more full human being and a more sometimes getting rid of certain fears or getting them out of the way and building confidence in certain directions, but exploring, like playing characters that are completely different than me and going through emotions I've never personally experienced, but you find them because you're tapping into your own humanity that we all share. And the point is, I think that I don't really enjoy the acting part for the sake of getting a role or achieving some sort of status with it. I just enjoy the process of learning what it is to be human and exploring those emotions and applying them to different circumstances. But I think the other thing why I'm probably more interested in Marlon Brando than your average person is just his curiosity about why people do what they do and what motivates our behavior, and trying to endlessly understand yourself and what your purpose is. And I don't know about you, I'm sure you do this as being the career that you're in, but I'm always analyzing other people and wondering what motivates them, and talking over dinner with my husband about someone we know or someone we observed that day, and like trying to understand what caused them to be this type of person or to have this type of a reaction, or those things are really fascinating to me. And I think that's potentially why I am such a big fan of Marlon Brando. Not to say I have in any way, shape, or form that I'm on the same level as him in that thinking, but I think there's that shared endless curiosity and fascination with people and why they do what they do, and why listening to him and some of his theories on things and his perspective and how that's changed over time is really just up my alley.
It's so interesting because I'm not an actor. As I said, in my short acting career in high school, I was terrible.
Your musical theater?
Yeah. I'm a singer, but I'm a terrible actor. I'm not that great of a singer, but I'm a much better singer than I am an actor.
What's your jam?
What do you mean, like what song? I'm a songwriter.
Like if you're in the car going somewhere by yourself and you're feeling the need to.
Well, I love the Beatles, and I love the Strokes, and I love the Knack. I love a lot of bands with the in the beginning.
Yeah. It's a safe bet to go with a band with the in the beginning.
The Cardigans, Elvis Costello.
The Cardigans. Have they seen that Love Fool song?
That's the worst of all their songs. I'm here
I think it's the only song of theirs I know.
Their first 3 albums are pop gold. That's the production and the melodies and every song's different, and they're one of my favorite bands.
Do you remember the first Beatles song you ever heard?
No, but I pretty much only knew of their early stuff. I didn't know about their psychedelic, weird stuff. And once I got older and started getting into that, I started really getting into that and liked it more. Mm-hmm. But as you describe, the identification you have with Marlon Brando in terms of your process of the craft or experience of acting. It reminds me of what we call improv or drama therapy.
Oh.
And it's just what you're talking about. It's essentially taking acting classes, but with no aspiration of actually acting. And as a family therapist, we incorporate some of these kinds of interventions where people will do different exercises of emotion and experience and role play and interactions and spontaneity and yes-anding and stuff, and how when you really get into it, how it just unleashes certain things about you, and you learn things, and you feel it, and it's real.
You feel yourself like expanding, and it's one of those things that if I would have heard somebody talk about this 10 years ago, I'd probably be like, yeah, that's not for me. But having done it and actually experienced it and felt how much it kind of re-energizes me and re-motivates me and takes me to a different level, whether it's in my thinking or in my willingness to walk through some fear and do it anyway, or, all those kinds of things, which sound a little bit amorphous, but I think they're all connected in that it's, how to summarize that. Do you have any words of wisdom?
Well, I could see how Marlon Brando is like the epitome of what you're talking about, and how many actors might look up to him in that way, because he was so raw and so good and so real and so willing to take a fall. And
I think willing to be seen. That's the thing. It's like we're all walking around kind of with some amount of protection all the time.
Yeah.
And maybe we lower it a little bit around certain people, but to truly be seen, be nakedly seen, is like a very scary thing. And then to be, up on a screen or in some sort of arena where people, their job is to judge you, to be like, was that good or was that bad? Did I like it or did I not? And then put it in the newspaper. And that's like 100 times more terrifying than just the doing of it. It's like now you're going to be judged for it too. And with art and anything in the creative realm, it's like, it's one thing to have the guts to make it, but then there's the whole possibility that, people may hate it and they may say terrible things about you. They may love it, but it's a scary career path to choose or to,
the little I know about it, I know enough to know that it's an emotional roller coaster. Yeah. All the auditions and the
rejection.
I got this gig. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, half the people hated it, and how Marlon Brando seemed to be above all that. He just seemed to be like, F you. Again, in the same way that Kurt Cobain is so beloved by young guitarists and singers, because it's just Kurt Cobain just gave a big finger to the entire thing, and there's something useful to the soul to try to bring that into your life,
Yeah, I agree. And I think the one thing that people don't necessarily always consider as it relates to actors, Brando spoke about, I think in an interview, somebody said, do you ever miss the theater? Would you ever want to go back to theater acting? And he was like, no way. He was like, you have to, for the 3 nights, every night, and sometimes twice on Sunday, like, you have to, if you're playing that kind of a role, like a Stanley Kowalski, you have to take yourself to this awful place of just emotionally destroying yourself, and the energy that it takes, and the, how exhausting that is. It's not fun to go to that place, every day for however long a show is running. And that's a thing I don't think I've thought about a ton when I'm watching. I guess it would be mostly stage actors, because you just assume, well, this is their job. They know how to do it. Right. They've been trained. But
it's not that hard. They just get up there and act.
Right.
Big deal. Yeah.
And
But it is a big deal because the
emotions are real. You're putting yourself in a place where you're experiencing that, if you're good, I guess you're actually having that physical sensation in your body, Right. And what can I say?
Yeah.
Marlon's very much a one of a kind, that's for sure.
Totally. Yeah. I can't think of anyone who, after learning about him, comes close to his humongousness of career and personality and stories and fascination and magnetism. I mean, I just after doing a deep dive on him, I can't think of anyone else that comes close to him, really.
Yeah.
And learning about him has been interesting psychologically. It's been interesting in terms of film, but it's also been interesting in terms of history of America in some ways, because he is intertwined in all that. And so, yeah, this has been a really fascinating thing to do. And Carey, thanks for coming on the podcast to talk about this. It's been almost 3 hours.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit!
Which is awesome, I think, for the listeners, because they like these deep dive episodes. And you've just been a really awesome expert from Whatcom County on Marlon Brando.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been really fun to talk about a person that I really am into. So thank you for having me. And here's to hopefully a not too arduous of an editing process that you have ahead of you to get this down to something.
There's only a couple moments where I said something stupid. Nothing that you said.
A lot.
That's all Stan. especially all that fart joke stuff. That's
some
staying
of my
in.
best material.
Yeah,
So
that whole
Glad.
gross bit will stay in.
yeah, good.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself and go out there and learn more about Marlon. Watch YouTube. There's a ton of interviews, just super interesting historical personality bits on YouTube. Watch all that. Please take care of yourself because you deserve it.